Welcome to Fantasy Sports Daily with Kyle Elfrink and Ray Flowers, Monday through Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't forget to use the promo code FSD20 for a 20% discount on the products over at fantasyguru.com.
Well, we are nearing the end of what I personally kind of feel like has been a long week. We welcome you to Fantasy Sports Daily, powered by fantasyguru.com. Ray Flowers over there, Kyle Elfrink right here. And Ray, I say long because, it's only been like 4 or 5 days since we last saw football. But I feel like this has been a long wait. Like in the regular season, the weeks never seem this long. But for some reason, leading up to the AFC and NFC championship games, it just feels like it's dragged a little more than usual, I think.
Well, we don't have games on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to tide you over.
Yeah, I think probably correct. Yeah, good point. Yeah.
But I think, it's fair too. And there's kind of a lull too in our industry, right? Like It's just like we hit the playoffs and it's like people play fantasy in the playoffs. We talk about it on the show. We're involved in leagues, but the participation levels, I don't know, 15, 20% of what it is during the season. Maybe it's less than that, to be honest. So I think they're just a natural. We've done this thing for 5 or 6 months. Let's take a breath. Hey, there's not really much going on. So I think we kind of self-perpetuated too, based just on being the industry.
I think that's exactly what it is. I think sometimes, Ray, we, and I say we, me, maybe Ray, maybe he'll deny this, or even the industry, you kind of become blind to the fact that we do this every day. So we like to think everybody does this every day and everybody does this as a job and everybody gets a reward. Like, Ray and I get paid to talk about this. Not everybody gets paid to worry about this. So when you commit, 17 weeks, which is a third of the entire year, and I would argue it's probably 20 weeks with prep and drafts and all that, you're getting up to 50% of a year devoted to this world, to this life. I get it, Ray, that when it becomes, January 1st, you kind of say, okay, I'll take a break. I got a life outside of this that isn't driven by talking about fantasy football.
Yeah, and it's tough too, because I think that there are, obviously if you're national media or if your team is still going on, right? You're as a beat reporter, you're covering it. But a lot of people are just they're floating. Now they're starting to look for the stories about, puppies and donating to charities because they don't have football to talk about. And, even there's always something going on in the NFL. So the NFL always has something to do, but the individual people that are involved, their roles often change in the postseason. And, there's not as much news. Yeah. That's the only news we have are rumors about interviews. That's seemingly the only news anyone shares about anything anymore. So yeah, it's just a weird time, but it'll pick up here in the next 24 hours and we'll be going and going and going again.
And before we get into the thick of today's show, unfortunately, probably the biggest news in our world, Ray, is kind of the continuation of what's going on with the NFFC. And we addressed this a bit yesterday, and a little more information has come out, and it's not good. It's not fun to talk about. I know these people. Ray knows these people. Many of you probably know these people or have participated in their contests. But, for those who missed it yesterday or haven't heard the news, there was, in effect, a postseason money fantasy playoff league over at the NFFC, which has been doing this for well over 2 decades, where it was discovered that, in effect, somebody on the NFFC side was kind of messing around with the league. And in effect, illegally entering and illegally changing lineups. And it's kind of been discovered since then, Ray, that maybe this goes deeper than a one-off, which is something that I said yesterday. It's not like people do this once and get caught. All these things, Ray. I don't care if you're going to the casino. Mm-hmm. I don't care if you're going to DraftKings. I don't care where you're going. The horse track. A lot of that is driven by faith in people. A lot of it is. Mm-hmm. And as we know, not everybody can be trusted. And as we know, money is a very powerful addiction for a lot of people. And we've learned over the years that the only way to kind of have a grasp of how deep something can get is to get a lot of regulation. And that's why DraftKings, FanDuel, and the casinos and horse tracks, they're regulated like crazy. And I know, regulation, everybody hates it until they need it. It's like a lawyer, And Ray, honestly, this, with the NFFC, a lot of it was driven by faith in the process. And they had never had anything in 20 plus years that caused a cut in that faith. There was never any severing of the rope. Unfortunately, there now is. And I'm sure there's probably more to come. And it's very, very unfortunate. And there's a lot of people probably angry because they're looking at years earlier where they were in contest with this quote unquote individual who may have been a ghost as much as anything. But, Ray, I get it. Money's involved and people certainly have a right to become emotional if they feel that things weren't on the up and up or on a level playing field.
Yeah. And Twitter X, where you can follow me at @DRayFlowers, is kind of the home base for the NFBC and a lot of their participants. It's kind of one of the main ways they all communicate. It just turned out that way over the years. And I spent a lot of time yesterday. I probably spent 20, 30 minutes just reading, responses and stuff. And it seems like a lot of people say, we trust Greg and Tom, it'll be fine. A lot of people are saying, I'm kind of concerned. And there's another group of people that are saying, I'm out.
Yeah.
And that's, in our business now, with the way things are going in the fantasy space, something we talked about yesterday, something we've talked about, I've talked about for years. You can't be losing 25% of your business. Like, it just makes it very tough to stay in business. So we will see how this all plays out. But the hardest part here is that the trust, you said, the trust is eroded.
Yeah.
And it's not Greg and Tom, but it's the product. And that's unfortunate. I don't think anyone, Jeff Mann said it on the show on Sirius XM yesterday. I said it on the show yesterday. You said it on the show yesterday. We trust these guys. We play in the event. Like, we trust them. But what else is going on here? And, when you start hearing rumors of other issues coming up, not just this one-off thing that we talked about, there's rumors about Week 16 being involved now. It's just a sad day for the sport. It's a sad day for the product. It's a sad day for the guys. And, Jeff said it yesterday, at the end of the day, you're going to lose more than you win. And you need to be a gracious loser. And a lot of people they can't accept losing, no matter whether it's for money or not. And they go bonkers bananas when they do. And it just ruins everything that people are involved with, Kyle.
Yeah. And it's probably going to ruin this. I mean, you hate to say that, but I mean, Ray, you were telling me, and you follow this a bit more because of your, acquaintance with X and Twitter and kind of the industry a little more than myself. But, this is now being picked up everywhere. It's become more of it's not on the front page of the New York Times, but it is getting picked up certainly on the internet. And, it's a big issue, and it's something that this won't be the last of these things. I think the DraftKings and FanDuel, I mean, there's going to be a reckoning at some point with that. And it's, you don't want to say this because it's not the way it should be, but Ray, you're gambling money, you're wagering money, and a lot of that involves faith in the process. And honestly, who knows over the last 50, 60 years, we've got parameters in place and we've got enforcement and the penalties are supposed to be harsh, but this is going on honestly, when you have a group of, for these big businesses and stuff, it takes hundreds, if not thousands of people. That's really tough to keep an eye on everybody. Let's just say that. And I'm not excusing it. It's not excused, but it's a fact of life. Is, they always say, I used to deal with this a lot. I covered college sports for a great deal of time. And when I was covering the University of Missouri, they were going through issues on the basketball team, guys getting in trouble. And are you breaking this rule? This is like under the Quinn Snyder era. And there were a lot of fishy things going on. And, it got to the point where, tell me any business that has 50 employees, 100 employees, 500,000, like, it's impossible to tie everything down. It just is. And that's why the hiring process is so important, which has become more difficult over the past few years. And Ray, sometimes someone can be trustworthy and they become almost too trustworthy. It sounds like this employee at the NFFC had been there, 20 years, 25 years, a long time. And they've all known him and they all, worked with him, friends with him, everything. And he just chose a wrong path. And unfortunately, it tears down the whole structure that has been built up with all the hard work. It's not like Greg and Tom or anybody with the NFC is being backed by Paramount or Netflix. They're not. Amazon isn't. Jeffrey Bezos isn't. These guys have built this, and the betrayal is immense. And unfortunately, it's kind of happening in real time. And I don't know everything. Ray doesn't know everything. But I think, Ray, the idea that people are going to turn into other directions or maybe just drop it altogether, that's kind of the big picture here. Is we know season long, whether it's basketball, football, or baseball, Ray, is fighting an uphill battle. And for a lot of people, the only thing that keeps them in season long is big prizes like this. saying I can pay $500 and I can win $500,000. That's what people want. And if that disappears, that kind of blows up the whole thing for season long. We'll still have home leagues.
Yeah.
But I mean, my goodness, the number one attractive part of home leagues has perhaps been taken away. And that's not happening right now, but it's something to think about, say 6 months from now, when signups are being requested again as we get set for another year.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest issues, besides my cat yelling in the background, which I apologize for. Hello, Dexter. He's got a lot to say about this topic too. The fact, and you mentioned this, that this has become a national story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I was talking to you, I saw a random CBS affiliate in Texas is tweeting about it.
Mm-hmm.
New York Post has got articles about it. Breitbart has got articles about it. People are calling for congressional hearings. Like it's become a big thing because there's a huge $100,000.
They got bigger things to listen to.
Of course. But you know what it is. Like you get 100,000 to 150. Like people, I think a lot of people that aren't in our industry or our sphere, right? Mm-hmm. Think that people play fantasy, they get together, they have some beers, they throw $100 around. I don't think many people realize you could win $100,000 doing this. Like they didn't realize that because they know what gambling is, but fantasy sports is not gambling. There are two separate categories. So unfortunately, because of the way this has gone down, and I'm not expecting congressional, come on, that's way too, like you said, there's way more important things we got to deal with, but that's the level that some people are going to here. And it's a black eye on the guys. It's a black eye on their company. It's a black eye on the sport. And we're at a point in time where we're kind of bleeding out a little bit here. We're bleeding out slowly in the fantasy space to have a gash just torn open like this and have the national media not really know what they're talking about, right? Not necessarily presenting the story the right way. How many, people reading that are going to say, well, I want to play fantasy football next year.
Yeah.
If you're in it,
or any other big money league, like
you and I are in it. You've been doing it since you were 14. Who cares? It's just part of we'll deal with it. We'll go through. But some 18-year-old kid who just starting to look into this, is he probably just go play gambling? He'll just go play DFS, right? So
I'll go to the stock market. At least they have the SEC keeping an eye on things,
right? Yeah, and I hate Big Brother. Like I'm a free market guy and the whole thing. But you're right. Yeah. Unfortunately, this is what happens. You get one or two of the bad apples that we always talk about. Like you say, there's 50 people, 49 of them are great. One of them's a terrible. And that one person is unfortunately the one that we end up having to focus on.
Yeah. We will leave it for now. Maybe more will come out over the weekend. And as warranted, we will address it. And, again, it's not something you want to have a whole show about or celebrate or be excited. It's bad for the industry. But our goal here has always just kind of been to tell you what's going on, to tell you the truth, whether it makes us look bad or not. And so that's what we're doing to start the things. Let's move on to greater and more exciting things. Let's talk about the weekend. Let's talk about what we've got going on here today on Fantasy Sports Daily. Ray, we got a lot as we get set for championship weekend. We're going to visit with Tyler Buecher coming up here in just a few moments. We've got some injury news. I don't know. Are you worried about this Pacheco thing? He missed practice again yesterday.
I think we need to see today, right? And the more information, but again, you and I've talked about this so many times when it comes to the playoffs, if you're not playing, you're broken, right? So I think he plays. The effectiveness piece, I guess, then a little bit of question, but I'm not overly concerned at the moment now.
As noted, we'll talk to Tyler here in just a few seconds. New head coaches in Atlanta and Carolina. I am not a fan of either franchise nor either team, but if I were, I'd probably be slightly underwhelmed. I don't know. Hey, everybody's got to start with their first head coaching job. Even Bill Belichick and Vince Lombardi had to get that first head coaching job, and they're not always known immediately when hired. Of course, in Atlanta's case, you've got a guy getting his second head coaching job. So we'll talk about those hires. We will conclude our roundup of all things wide receivers. It's been a great deal of this week, kind of recapping what went down in 2023 at that position. Today, we're going to look ahead. We'll talk about the 2024 draft class. We could see, I think it's kind of likely, maybe 3 wide receivers in like the first 10 picks or so. So we'll talk about that. We'll sneak in some baseball talk. We'll discuss more on Ray's draft guide. We'll talk about the history of the first round. We will spotlight that article today. And of course, we will continue our spotlight of the catchers, talking about the youth. It is a younger position with guys that have already kind of arrived that we're getting excited about. but there might be a couple of other names that could sneak into our image and into our view, I should say, as we get ready for 2024. So the baseball coming up, but we will start with football, and we will begin with our friend Tyler Buecher, who is hanging out with us on a Friday. Always good to check in with Tyler, and we've been doing this a lot on Fridays. We have made it to this point where maybe there's only a couple of more Fridays of bothering Tyler, but it's good to bother him on this one as we get set for championship weekend. Tyler, good to see you, sir. How are things going?
Things are great. It is 71 degrees here in Virginia. 3 days ago, we had snow, so I am ecstatic. I've had the window open all morning. It's a great day.
Are you still rolling a Josh Gordon uniform in the background? Is that to troll Ray Flowers with that?
It's one of my favorites. I got it for like $20, I believe, a few years ago.
You overpaid, Tyler. I'm sorry. You overpaid on that one. Let's talk about these games. We'll start with the early one, Baltimore KC. Ray and I were addressing the Pacheco thing. We obviously don't know. I guess you assume he's probably going to be out there, but talk about the importance of him to this offense. You know, it seems like the last 3 or 4 years with Kansas City, it's, well, we'll get something from this running back, but nothing elite, or this guy is a one-year bridge, if you will, to the next guy. Pacheco appears, Tyler, like in the last, 6-7 games to have really become much more of a part and a more important piece of this Kansas City offense.
For sure, yeah, 15 plus carries in 7 of his last 8 healthy games. This is a great way for them to have a chance at actually upsetting the Ravens, is by establishing the run and having Pacheco going. That's a sneaky place where the Ravens have struggled. Like, they're usually a defense that, like, we think because of maybe even just last week, Devin Singletary absolutely shut down in the run game. But Pacheco, he's a guy, like, this Ravens defense is allowing the 6th highest yards per carry to opposing running backs. Like, you don't think of the Ravens as that, but they're giving up 4.47 yards per carry. They're 22nd in rush success rate. They're 16th in EPA per rush. Like, this is not a top end run defense. Where the Ravens really succeed is in the pass defense. So I imagine we're going to see some struggles for Mahomes. They're probably going to play a lot of ways to, like, limit explosive plays for him, forcing him to dink and dunk and have long, consistent drives, which kind of benefits the Ravens in terms of them playing small ball, limiting possessions, and playing right into how the Ravens want to play. We also have weather as a factor. Like, this game has a 70% chance of rain, so we could see even more carries for Pacheco, making him a very, very important piece of this game.
Let's talk a little bit more, Tyler, about Mahomes. Like you mentioned, Ravens defense strong against the pass. Are we looking at a 243-yard, 1.6 touchdown game or something like that from Mahomes? There haven't been a lot of big efforts. Is there a scenario where we get a big effort? If we're playing, DFS, or we're playing, some level of fantasy this week, where do you place Mahomes amongst the foursome there at the quarterback position?
Great question. I'm personally fading as a single entry player, just because, like you said, the matchup is very difficult. They finished the league number 1 in multiple categories. So I'm just going to list them real quick: points per game, sacks, yards per attempt, takeaways, passing touchdown rate allowed. This was just a very, very good defense across the board. The loss of left guard Joe Thuney, who I believe is I think it was DMPs to start the week. I haven't seen any updates yet today.
Yeah, very questionable at best, I think. Yeah.
Right. He was PFF's number 1 highest graded pass blocking guard. So that's actually a significant loss. I find it a good week to be bearish on Mahomes' outlook, especially given the fantasy potential for guys like Lamar Jackson or for a guy like Brock Purdy in the other game.
If we look at the way the Chiefs offense has had success through the air this season, for the most part, it's been Kelsey, and later on it's been Rashee Rice. Is there a third piece this week, Tyler? Is there someone that you've looked at the matchups and you said, this guy's gonna pop? I like what I see here based upon what the Ravens bring to the field. Or is it going to be 17 targets to those two guys, Kelsey and Rice, and that's really how the offense is going to work through the air?
Yeah, I imagine it's going to be that way. These two have been the lead way of how Mahomes has been productive the entire season, but mostly ever since like their week, I think it was a week 12 bye, or since week 12 on, it's been like Rashee Rice, 27% target share in the regular season, Kelsey like a 20 or 22%. We've seen Kelsey get more involved here these last 2 games in the postseason, but the offense revolves around these two guys. I imagine we could see some more checkdowns for Pacheco, who has really not seen a ton of work. We've seen Mahomes be much more willing to run with the ball, but that's kind of just how he operates in the postseason. He kind of saves himself and tends to have higher rushing rates, higher scramble rates, higher design rushes in the postseason. But I imagine some of those options could go down to checkdowns for Pacheco, who hasn't really been involved heavily in the pass game, I think, these last 2 outings.
Tyler, where's the edge for the Baltimore offense here? I mean, obviously having Lamar Jackson is an edge because he can break off plays and hurt you with his legs. But is there a matchup or maybe a play calling edge that Baltimore may put into play here against this Kansas City defense?
Yeah, they are a team where we want to see them find success on early downs. Like, we want Lamar to be in second and manageable, third and manageable. They can consistently gain 5 to 7 yards on the ground, which they easily could. The Chiefs have struggled against the run all season long, and the reason why you don't really see it is because they're most often winning games. Opponents are forced to pass against them. But they rank 32nd in ESPN's run-stop win rate, 28th in EPA per rush, 29th in yards per carry allowed to opposing running backs. This is not a defense to fear on the ground, and the Ravens, they are going to be more than happy to run it with the duo of Gus Edwards, Justice Hill, maybe 2 to 3 carries for Dalvin Cook, and quite a few carries for Lamar Jackson. Lamar, 11, 102 last week against the Texans. He was just the second player all season long to put up 100 yards on this Texans run defense, who was top 5 in fewest yards per carry allowed. I think Lamar has been saving himself for this postseason. This is not the situation where we're going to see him slide or go out of bounds. This is where we're going to see him make another cut and fight for those additional 3 to 5 extra yards, which if he breaks the tackle, that could be 10 to 40. You know what I mean? There's such a high upside for Lamar. The way the Ravens win this game, though, is by running the ball, and I think they're going to do it. They're going to find success. I think they're going to do well.
And to that point, for those in DFS or one and done, I'm certainly in this case in my one and done league. I've got both Edwards and Hill available. I mean, for most of the season we've leaned Edwards because of the touchdowns, and he's been there since week 1. Has it changed a lot in the last month with Hill getting more opportunities? Is he maybe more of a consideration than some of us might think to use him this week against Kansas City?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the injury to Keaton Mitchell really hurt this offense, and we've seen Justice Hill kind of accelerate his usage and touches post-injury. Gus Edwards, I mean, he remains a low floor, low ceiling play. What are we hoping for? 45 yards and a touchdown? That's really the best case scenario. But if he doesn't reach the paint, then we're probably left with single digit performance in terms of fantasy. He's not involved in the pass catching game at all. Justice Hill would be a player I'd much rather lean on. They're a little bit closer in terms of usage this last 2 weeks. Hill especially has a far higher upside in the pass game. And I mean, we're not going to see Lamar check down frequently, but I'm seeing Justice Hill's receiving prop at 12 yards. And I'm like, you could fly over that in one play.
Mm-hmm. Tyler, we've got our staff picks that go up obviously over at fantasyguru.com, but share with us your prediction for the game. Who's going to emerge victorious? What are your thoughts? Who's going to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl?
You can kind of tell from my tone, but I'm going to go with Baltimore in this game. They are 3.5 or 4-point favorites, depending on where you're looking. They've just been absolutely phenomenal this season. They have 11 wins this season against teams with winning records. 9 of those 11 wins are won by over 14 plus points. That's the most in NFL history.
Let's switch to the NFC. We got 2 things going on here. One, we've got a team traveling across the country. The Lions are obviously going to San Francisco. And then we've got Jared Goff, who the numbers aren't amazingly different, but he is a different performer at home versus on the road. So talk to us about Goff and the offense with the Lions moving across country here to face a Niners defense that at least up front is very strong.
Yeah, I'm going to throw out all the home road splits here for Jared Goff. We're looking at a 70-degree weather day, 0 precipitation, negligible wind. This is, for all intents and purposes, an indoor game. He does enter with a banged up line, losing left guard Jonah Jackson, center Frank Ragnow. We got to look at final injury reports for those guys because that's huge in terms of their availability and what that provides for both the passing and the rushing attack specifically. This is just not a great matchup for Goff, though, in terms of the defense. The 49ers, they're number 6 in EPA for pass allowed. They're number 7 in pass success rate allowed. They've given up, I think, the 6th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. I just don't see a high ceiling from Goff here, to be honest. I think you can honestly bet the passing under. The way that the Lions are going to win this game or keep it competitive is finding success on the ground. It's kind of a boring path to production, but the Lions have been doing it all season. They're great at it. The 49ers are relatively weaker against the run than the pass. And I think there's a chance that we see Jared Goff just kind of put up a middling outing, kind of not a need to have it kind of thing, just a fine performance.
We all got stabbed in the heart last week when Craig Reynolds scored that 1-yard touchdown, Tyler,
yes.
Instead of David Montgomery, who had scored 4 straight games. You mentioned the running attack and how important it's going to be this week for the Lions. Talk to us through your expectations for both Gibbs and Montgomery and what your expectations are.
Yeah, again, it's not like a layup matchup by any means. Like the 49ers have given up the second fewest rushing yards per game to opposing backs. But again, some of that's really game script dependent, given that the 49ers are frequently playing with a lead. When we zoom in on the numbers a bit more, they are giving up 4.14 yards per carry to opposing backs. They are giving up the 27th highest rush success rate to opposing backs. Like, this is not a defense they absolutely fear. They're also top 12 in receiving fantasy points, specifically to opposing running backs. So a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, who has that explosive playability on both the ground and the run, I mean, we could see some outside runs for Gibbs where he goes for 15, 20 plus yards. We could see the same thing in the passing game as a check down option for Jared Goff. There's just a path to Jahmyr Gibbs being a player that I don't think you want to fade on this slate.
Tyler Buecher with us. He will have his game scripts article out in time for Sunday's kickoffs. Both games, of course, taking place on Sunday. Tyler, on the San Francisco side, we're still in a total limbo with Deebo Samuel. Maybe we'll get more clarification, but let's assume, and again, folks, assume, not certain, but let's assume he's out. What's that mean for Ayuk and also, I guess, Juwan Jennings? Like, do these guys really jump up if Samuel's not on the field?
I mean, all year long, like, we've had like these really stark splits between Ayuk and Deebo when we face a man coverage defense or a zone heavy defense. And Ayuk has been the man beater, and that's what the Lions play. They are a very man heavy defense. I've already bet the over on Ayuk's receiving prop earlier this year. I bet the over on his longest reception prop. The Detroit Lions are absolutely getting torched on the perimeter, which is where Ayuk runs the majority of his routes. So I'm expecting a big game for Ayuk, whether or not Deebo plays. If Deebo were to play, I think that Ayuk's ceiling is still sky high, given just the poor matchup. They just allow such big plays on the outside. Juwan Jennings, though, yeah, very, very high floor play option. We saw that last week against the Packers. Happened again earlier in the year whenever Deebo missed some time where he was a productive asset in 1 or 2 games. But George Kittle has been quietly the far more productive guy whenever Deebo's been out. He's averaging like over 19 fantasy points per game over the last 2 seasons in games where Deebo has missed, and that's over a 6-game sample. So it's not just like a 1 or 2 game where Kittle hits for 1 or 2 scores. He's been productive. So Kittle's a guy that I'm really, really interested in if Deebo were to miss.
You know, the highlight with QBs in terms of the matchup will be the early game. You know, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes. This one is a certain second fiddle, Goff against Purdy. And you see that in like the DraftKings pricing. Like, if you want to go to Mahomes and Jackson, it's, well, especially Jackson, I mean, 7,700. Mahomes is kind of cheap at 69, but then you have Goff at 63, you have Purdy at 64. For people who are playing, you know, both games here, the idea of Purdy, I mean, you mentioned Detroit getting torched in man. Is Purdy maybe the sleeper call here for DFS?
I don't know if he's a sleeper because he's been super underpriced all season long on DraftKings. For some reason, their pricing algorithm has kept him kind of in the mid-range bucket. Despite him leading the league in yards per attempt and passing touchdown rate, I think he's a slam dunk play here for any kind of single entry contest, any kind of cash 50-50s. The only reason not to play Purdy is to get different. But I think Purdy's a very, very high floor, high ceiling play. And at his price tag, he allows you to get in the studs elsewhere.
Tyler, I'm born and raised in the Bay Area. I think you know that. So the Niners are obviously my team. I don't call them my team, so I don't play for them, but they're my team. It sounds like you think they're going to smash the Lions and win this game and make the Super Bowl, right? Give us your prediction for the game.
Yes, I do believe the Niners win this game, unfortunately. I kind of want Detroit to win just for the narrative and the storyline. Like, it's been fun to root for Detroit this year, seeing them make such a massive turnaround. But yeah, I think San Francisco just has too many weapons. Their defense should be able to make the Lions one-dimensional at some point, which makes them having to put all the onus and responsibility on Jared Goff, who runs into a troubling matchup. Like, he leads the league in percentage of throws towards the middle of the field. I want to give a nod to Rich Rebar for this stat. Goff leads the league in percentage of throws to the middle of the field, and the 49ers are giving up the lowest QB rating to the middle of the field. So I think we're going to see some struggles there for Goff here once the 49ers build a lead.
Incredible breakdown, no doubt. Just here, and Tyler, I don't know. I may have sprung the work on you. You're doing the game script Sunday, correct? I should have double checked that, but I would.
I've got it done. I've got it done. Yeah, we're good to go.
Well, let me in closing then, because I challenged you with the QBs. This is kind of a rare week where the tight end position's loaded for DFS, because all these teams, you know, like Kelsey, Laporta, Kittle, and then Andrews are likely. Who's your favorite tight end? Does anybody have like a great super matchup as a tight end of these 4 teams?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it already. It's Kittle, who's the guy that I'm kind of gravitating toward. He's coming off a big outing, 4 catches, 81 yards, and a score, 7 targets last week in that game without Deebo. Earlier this year, there were 2 games without Deebo. Kittle had 18 targets across that 2-game span, and over the last 2 years and 6 games without Deebo, he's averaging 19.6 fantasy points per game. This is also a week where I think you can go 2 tight ends in DFS, just given the massive gap in fantasy production between like the top 4 or so wide receivers. You can make an argument for 5. And like the really like, I want to call them bargain plays at wideout, where the tight ends like Sam Laporta or Travis Kelce, they just make much more sense in terms of a ceiling outcome rather than spending down at wideout. So be cognizant of how you're building your squads. Make sure you always have that last player in the Sunday night game at 6:30 p.m. Eastern going as your flex, and that way it gives you more outs, so you have late swap available to you.
I apologize. David just chimed in the chat room, and I think it's something worth thought. You talked about that stat of throwing in the middle of the field. So, okay, let's say Goff wants to avoid the middle. For the season, how has he looked when throwing to the sidelines? Does he have proficient numbers? Is it a mess, or do we have those numbers available?
Well, I mean, when you think about it, like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta have been his 2 primary go-to guys. Of course, like with Laporta and Montgomery mostly being, St. Brown, running most of their routes across the middle of the field. That's like genuinely where most of his production is going to come from. We've seen hit or miss plays from Jameson Williams all year. Josh Reynolds has been boomer bust. Generally, it's because of the way the offense is designed, where first, second read, then check down. Like he's not getting to that third read, which is often Josh Reynolds running uncovered. For that reason, I think we're probably just going to see some struggles when he does turn to the outside. And the 49ers on the outside, Charvarius Ward, PFF's number 8 cornerback, very, very good in coverage. It's not going to be an easy matchup on the outside.
Might just mean a few more dump offs, perhaps, for Gibbs. Maybe that's the way they'll decide to avoid the middle of the field. Okay, awesome stuff, Tyler. We kept you really long, but hey, important games, so we wanted to do it. Really a pleasure, man. Thanks for jumping on board. I didn't get a hold of Tyler till late last night, so good to know he's always checking his email late. I'll probably make use of that again sometime. I don't know. Tyler, have a good one, man. Take it easy.
You too. Good luck this weekend, guys.
You bet. Gonna be fun. 3:00 for that first game, Kansas City and Baltimore, 6:30 for San Francisco and Detroit. He kind of sold me on the idea, certainly, of San Francisco. I didn't need much selling, Ray. Against the spread, it's tough to avoid or to say no to Patrick Mahomes as a 3.5-point underdog. I think I heard it. He's lost 3 times in the playoffs. 2 of them are to Tom Brady. Okay, greatest playoff quarterback ever. And the other loss was in overtime. So, it's one of those things. I think he's 14, 15-3, something like that. I think Baltimore's in a good spot. I still struggle, though, with the idea that Baltimore's kind of let us down in years past, Ray. And I guess I'm not a total believer yet in the Ravens. I think I'd take Kansas City here.
Well, yeah, I think it's tough because Ravens are obviously at home. They've got the strong defense. And, Tyler glowingly spoke about Lamar Jackson, which is totally fair, right? But at the end of the day, if Lamar Jackson has to beat you with his arm, can he? And that's something we all come back to. And again, no one ever really stops him on the ground, so he never becomes a pocket passer. But, talking about a guy that can't throw outside the hash marks, like Lamar still struggles there. Yeah. So, they've got a good defense. They have a good scheme. They got a good coordinator in Kansas City. Can they create enough havoc that they force Lamar to throw the ball differently than he wants to? I think it's tough not to go Ravens. But you can create a scenario where they don't win the football game, of course.
Yeah, and these are it's a Final Four teams. It's not like somebody snuck into this spot. They've been playing for 20+ weeks. Maybe Detroit isn't someone you expected to be here 8 weeks ago, but I don't think anyone doubts they're one of the better teams in the NFC East, and they've proven that throughout the season for the most part. So it'll be fun on Sunday. Always tough to make picks, and it's not saying, this team sucks. None of them suck, but hey, got to make a choice at some point. A couple of other things with the NFL, and then we'll swing it over to baseball. New coaches, Ray. Atlanta goes Raheem Morris. Carolina goes Dave Canales, who was the OC this year at Tampa. Before that, he'd been with Seattle as their OC for a number of years, but I don't know, a little bit off the radar. We'd heard a lot of other names, and Ben Johnson with Detroit and Harbaugh and Belichick and Vrabel and all these guys. Instead, Raheem Morris gets another shot. I think it was 3 years with Tampa. before he was let go as the head coach. And then Dave Canales is brand new to the head coaching job as he takes over in Carolina.
He's very calm on the sidelines calling plays. I've noticed that. Was he's holding his arm with his big watch? That one, I mean, I think that, Panthers the only team that even interviewed him, right?
Yeah.
I don't think he was part of the cycle. Now, that doesn't say anything per se, but I think that, okay, at least they brought in an offensive mind, which is what they needed to do.
I was just going to say, Ray, don't you kind of feel he came into that interview room and he probably sat there and the whole interview was about turning Bryce Young into the real deal? And he probably came with a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And if they would have asked him about his O-line, running backs, or wide receivers, he probably wouldn't have had anything to say. I just feel he sat in that interview, Ray, and sold them on what he can do for Bryce Young.
I mean, whether Young was the right pick or not, and we made the pick. We got to go. We got to make it work. So, yeah, that obviously, and we heard this with Kingsbury when they brought him in with Kyler Murray. Like, we got to get Kyler Murray going. We spent this draft capital. They've got to figure a way to make the offense better, period. Just period. They, and this is a bad football team that needs a strong hand to lead it and an offensive mind. So let's give Canales a chance. Maybe he ends up being the next Mike Shanahan or Scott McVay or Matt LaFleur, but it was interesting that I've seen out of the box that terminology used for him because, again, no one else was interested in hiring him. But, it goes back to what you were saying yesterday or maybe it was the other day. Like, you have a good year and people are interested. Like Baker Mayfield has this great year. Let's get his OC. Okay, it helped.
Well, the other thing that helped, Ray, is Dave Tepper, the owner of the Panthers, is quickly ascending the ladder as like one of the more meddlesome guys. So a lot of coaches, maybe they didn't want to deal with it. And maybe Carolina realized that and said, hey, we got to go with a guy who's just wanting a job. Yeah. And hey, who would turn it down? Right. I may sit here and mock ESPN a lot, Ray, and say I'd never watch it. But if they called today, I'd take the call. Who's going to turn it down if it's actually there and available for you? So those jobs taken care of. Let's see. What are we down to? Washington? And I guess, Ray, that's like a Ben Johnson thing. I don't know. I guess that's because they seem to be waiting on Vrabel's out there.
Right.
It's kind of weird to think that Vrabel and Belichick, maybe two guys without a gig next season.
Yeah, and Vrabel can, go home and sit on his couch and come back next year, right? And that kind of thing. Maybe he could do TV for a year if he wanted, that kind of thing. Belichick's in his 70s, like you're saying. Would he take a coordinator job? I can't fathom him doing it. I can't. And he's like 20 victories away from the all-time record. So does he take a year off and come back next year? Does he end up being the guy that gets hired in week 7 when someone gets fired?
How funny would it be if he got a TV gig, Ray, and he became like John Madden? Like all of a sudden, Bill Belichick is Mr. Personality. You'd be like, holy cow, listen to this guy. I mean, that'd be one of the most impressive head fakes in the history of head fakes.
Good call. Yeah,
30 years of being one guy that all of a sudden overnight, it's like, oh, everybody wants to be Bill Belichick's buddy. Look how funny he is in the booth. We shall see. Wide receivers. Wrapping up the week, full discussion of wide receivers all week long here on FSD. As usual, Ray, we wrap up the position by looking at the upcoming draft class. Next week, by the way, we'll do tight ends. And I said this earlier, Ray, there's a lot of talent at the top. And we were just talking about Carolina. Oh, they need a receiver, don't they? Well, too bad. They don't have a first-round pick. They traded that to get Bryce Young. So Carolina won't be one of those teams. But, Ray, everywhere I look, I mean, you're looking at 3 and occasionally 4 names very early, but like 3 in the top 10. You're Marvin Harrison Jr. out of Ohio State. Yes, he's the son of that Marvin Harrison. Probably a top 5 pick. There's a way he ends up as number 1 on some draft boards. Malik Neighbors of LSU, Rome Odunze of Washington. You got guys like Brian Thomas Jr. also of LSU, Keon Coleman. All these guys are first-round picks. So we're probably looking at 5 or 6. And I was looking at the top of the draft, Ray. I mentioned 3 in the top 10. As I see it, teams drafting in the top 10, Chicago, New England, Arizona, probably the Chargers, the Giants, the Titans. Not to say their only need is wide receiver, but those are all teams that they're going to be tempted to get one of these names, especially the Patriots who are sitting at 3, Ray. Mm-hmm. I think they're kind of praying that Marvin Harrison Jr. falls to them.
Yeah, and obviously it depends upon if there's further movement and what the Bears do and everything. But the Marvin Harrison talk, and we see this in the fantasy space because we're getting questions in Discord over at fantasyguru.com or social media. Like people are trading like 4 players to get the second pick in the draft or the first pick in the draft to try to get Marvin Harrison. Like people are doing the here we go, generational talent thing with Marvin Harrison, right? That's what we're hearing.
Marvin Harrison is the last Marvin Harrison.
Yeah, right. No, I think he's like 4 inches taller than his dad, which is nice because his dad was a diminutive receiver. But obviously where you land, what your offense is, who your quarterback is, all these things play into the success it'll have, to start his career. But there are wild expectations in the NFL and even wilder expectations, I think, in the fantasy space that Marvin Harrison's going to be one of these guys catching 100 passes for 1,500 yards. So I don't know if he falls to the 3rd pick. I mean, I haven't spent a lot of time looking at, mocks because I think they're all crap anyway. But there's certainly a scenario where he goes 1, and there is a scenario where he falls to 3.
Well, and here's the thing with New England, Ray. It's great to get Marvin Harrison Jr. Who the hell's throwing him the football? And that may be the case with Tennessee, with the Giants. Like, man, you get him with Justin Herbert with the Chargers. But the problem there, Ray, is like LA has been investing in receivers.
Yeah.
Mike Williams, Quentin Johnston, Josh Palmer. Like, they've had guys, and it's not creating a different wins and losses record.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, there's the appetizer. Wow, Herbert and Marvin Harrison. That's going to be great. But we'll see, but it's plenty full. Again, we could have 5-6 guys going in the first round. So where they land will be critical because if you have Marvin Harrison in New England, honestly, you got to be less excited than if he's with the Chargers, in the fantasy landscape. So we shall see, but plenty of talent. So wide receivers will be there in the first round. No doubt about that. Speaking of the first round, that leads us to talking baseball. We're doing it each and every day as we get closer and closer to spring training. Again, want to remind everybody that the seasonal coverage, the draft package, all available right now at fantasyguru.com. You see it there at the bottom of the screen. Make sure to use that promo code FSD20 and you will get 20% off the entire season, not just the draft guide, but the entire season. And Ray, we were just talking about first round wide receivers. We like to think that all those guys will be hits. Usually it's about 50-50 with a position like wide receiver. That leads us to the first round of fantasy baseball drafts, which you have been following for many, many years, where we all like to sit here and say, hey, this is how it's going to be, man. Here are your 12 or 15 best players. And there's no doubt these guys will finish there, as you have been discussing for many years now. It's not always that easy. I will say last year was pretty good, I think, for the first round. A lot of those guys we drafted early performed very capably, but Ray, historically, our hit rate is not as great as we'd like.
Yeah, Baseball HQ started a study, 20 years ago, and I used to read about it, and then that's a really good thing for us to review. So then I started doing it myself. Like you said, I've been doing it for years. And, on the screen there, you can see the list of the top 15 guys according to ADP last year. And we had, 7 hits last year, which is remarkable. It's remarkable. Normally, and you can see it there from 2018 to 2022, 4, 4, 4, 4, 5 out of 15. So the last 5 years, and this goes back about the last 20 years, actually, we have about a 33% chance or success rate, a 33% success rate of the top 15 players being drafted, having a fantasy season that produces a top 15 season.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is something we've talked about forever, and whether all the sports, we talk about this way, way, way too much. Everyone is worried about who they're taking in the first round. And the data is irrefutable. You have about a 33% chance of being right with who you take in the first round. It can be injury related. It can be poor performance related. It can be off the field stuff, whatever. But you have about a 1 in 3 chance of that top 10, top 15 guy being a top 10 or top 15 guy at the end of the year. So we just spend far too much time and energy worried about this. We should be worried more about building a team. We should worry about the composition of your squad. We should worry more about the guys you're taking in the 8th round, the 10th round, those kind of things, because history, despite what we saw last season, which was a kind of a standout, history suggests we are just not very good at this.
Well, and looking at last season specific to it, Ray, even if they didn't finish this first rounder, a lot of these no's did just fine. Maybe they weren't great, but like Yordan Alvarez, I don't know. Sure, you would have liked more games, but he was fine. I think Trey Turner had a huge push at the end to save his season. He looked like a monumental bust for about half the year. Jose Ramirez was good. Maybe he, took a dip down. Like if you say, okay, did they finish top 30, top 40? I mean, a lot of these guys were still there.
Right.
And the guys who didn't, I don't know. You look at that list, I guess Vlad was the healthiest of the guys that didn't. Maybe Machado. How many games did Machado play last year?
150.
Yeah, so he was fairly healthy too. I mean, those of the guys who stayed healthy, those are probably the letdown. Now, the question as we move it forward, Ray, this is what I always like asking, Ray. Our current top 12, Ray, our top 15. Who's not going to make it this year? Because we're already settling in, Ray, to like, these are your top 10 players. It happens every year. And, guys who are new this year, Bobby Witt Jr. is way up the board in fantasy circles. Corbin Carroll, way up the board. Top 5 now for Corbin Carroll. I'm seeing Kyle Tucker, Fernando Tatis, Spencer Strider, which I hate that idea. I guess somebody's just wanting a pitcher. Trey Turner and Aaron Judge and Soto, despite the struggles last year, are still there. Like, is there a name, Ray, or is there a concern? I mean, some of these guys who missed last year, Ray, it's almost like, who cares? Because they're right back into the first round this season.
Yeah. Number one, I was wrong. Machado played 138 games.
Okay. So he had,
a little so he did miss some time. Yeah. What do you notice? I'll answer your question in a second, but what do you and the listeners, followers notice when they look at that list of the top 15 guys last year? How many?
No pitchers.
There you go. How many pitchers are on that list?
I knew that. Yeah.
No pitchers are on the list, and we had the greatest success rate we've ever had.
Aha.
So what does that tell you? That's not to say Spencer Strider can't be a superstar. It's not to tell you that. But if we're playing the odds, don't take Spencer Strider.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're just playing the odds, just because, again,
Garrett Cole, by the way, also in the top 15 this year, 2 pitchers.
Yep. And again, Garrett Cole's been the most consistent upper end pitcher for about 5 years now. So again, not saying you can't be the number 1 or 2 guy. That's how they're ranked over at fantasyguru.com. Like, I get it. But if you're trying to play the odds, they're the most likely ones to not live up to expectations, because obviously they don't get saves, which limits them a little bit. The win total is variable. They could pitch the same way and win 20 games or 15 games. And then there's the injury factor. Pitchers get hurt. They tend to miss more time than players when they get hurt, because the injuries are more significant, or they're more concerning because they're worried about other injuries being, a result of that. So those guys immediately should be concerns. History also shows us that players that attain first-round status for the first time are bad additions the next year. So a guy like Bobby Witt would be, Corbin Carroll, historically speaking, would be concerns. Now, I think those 2 guys are different, because I think those guys were always predicted to be superstars. They steal bases at an insanely high rate, even with the running that we saw uptick last year. So I think they would be safer. I think another guy for me in this group here, Kyle, would be Fernando Tatis. And it's really interesting that Tatis, who dealt with so many issues staying on the field in his career and off the field, was on the field last year. And it's like a lot of people have just overlooked the fact that he had his worst batting average, he had his worst on-base percentage, and his history suggests strongly that he's not playing another 149 games or whatever the hell it was this year. He's not getting another 600 plate appearances. That's what history says.
Yeah, it's always difficult. Last year, Ray, Trey Turner would have been like, that's safe. That's super safe. We got the new stolen bases rules. He's going to lead the league. And that's how everybody treated it. And man, oh man, it didn't happen. So like, we even look at this list this year and you say, oh, that guy's safe. That guy's safe. Like, people are going to say, hey, well, Ron Acuna, that's safe. Or Mookie Betts, that's safe. Freddie Freeman. Like, Ray, what could be safer than Freddie Freeman?
100%.
Really? There's nothing safer. Kyle Tucker. Like, these guys are super safe, but I've stopped saying that, Ray, because super safe means nothing.
Well, but also think about it in the case of Freeman. Perfect example. Freeman, if we're talking about reliability, is an A+. He's elite. He plays every day. He's across the board strong. He hits 300. Still 23 bases last year. Like, he never had 15 before. Like, and I know the rules are better and all that. He's 34 years old and he's a first baseman, and that 23 falls back down to 11. We just chopped a whole lot of value off of him. So he could still have a great season and be one of these guys that ends up number 17 or whatever, like we're talking about. So I think it really comes down to what people's goals are in the first round. And for me, as much as it is about getting the production, it's about minimizing risk, which is why you and I have had this discussion for 14 years now. And I've never said take a pitcher in the first round. I think, to me, that's just too much risk.
Much more in the draft guide on the history of the first round in fantasy baseball. Do check it out. One of dozens of articles that you can hunt down there right now, and more are being released each and every day. Ray, let's get to the catcher position. We've been talking about it all week. One thing that we haven't honed in on completely and drilled down to its source is the youth at this position. And it's part of the discussion we've had throughout the week about how catcher is becoming a little more deeper. It's not a vast wasteland with 3 guys you want and then 25 guys you would rather not want. Now we're maybe down to 8 or 9 guys that you're fine with. And I've even read, Ray, that some people say, you know what, if I had catcher 15 or 16 as my catcher 1 in a 2-catcher league, I can survive. And I kind of look at that list, and maybe I wouldn't go that deep, but I don't disagree. And this all goes to the youth. It's pretty remarkable, Ray. William Contreras may be the best catcher in fantasy. Some people have him ranked there. Rauschman, number 1 or number 2 almost everywhere. Yennier Diaz, Keibert Ruiz, both these guys were catcher 1s last year. Gabe Moreno, Francisco Alvarez, Logan O'Hoppe, Bo Naylor. I mean, those are 3, 6, 8 dudes, Ray. All young, in year 1 or 2 in effect. They're probably all top 15, don't you think? I mean, 8 very young catchers in the top 15 this year.
Yeah, and it's, I think that the catcher position has always been one where, in general, I have said when we've had this discussion in the past, I'm not taking a top 5 catcher. They're too expensive. I don't want catchers 23 and 24 if I'm in a 12-team league with 2 catchers. I want to be in the 8 to 15 range. That's a number or zone that we've identified for years now. And if we're in that 8 to 15 zone, according to ADP, and I end up with Gabriel Moreno and Keibert Ruiz, sign me up. ADP says that's totally doable, right? So I think that it's interesting that area is one that in the past we've targeted kind of as a good spot. And this year in particular, to what you're talking about here, there's a ton of youth in that 8 to 15 zone that certainly seems primed to at least be adequate, if not to take a step in 2024.
Yeah, if you look at ADP, and these are courtesy of the NFBC, I do trust these numbers. There are 5 catchers in the top 110 overall, 5 catchers in general. And then, Ray, from I'd say 5 catchers in the top 130. Let's just extend it at 5. And then from 130 to 170, 10 catchers. They really come hot and heavy. So if you are thinking kind of the way I'm thinking, and it sounds like the way Ray is thinking, in a 12-team league, Ray, you should be able to usually get, 11th through the 15th round, those rounds, it might be the spot to get your 2 catchers in the 2-catcher league. And I've always, in most years, in most leagues with 2 catchers, Ray, I'll get my first catcher maybe in that 13 to 15 range. And then I usually wait until the 20s for that second catcher, most leagues. This year, Ray, might truly be a year where I think about, I don't know about double tap at the catcher position, but I'm much more likely this season to think about 2 catchers being selected between, say, round 12 and 16.
Yeah, and I think that the double tapping, which is basically 2 picks in a row at the same position, I think that's extremely intriguing. We're talking 11th, 12th round, 12th, 13th round, and you're on the turn. You've got the first or the last pick, and you want to take both guys there. I don't think that, depending upon how the team,
Ray, is you feel good now about your 2 catchers. You didn't have to pay an exorbitant price to get them.
Right.
And beyond that, now you're able to get that extra pitcher in round 23 or 24 to take that shot on a guy who's starting in AAA, or a guy who maybe is the 8th inning dude right now, but you kind of forecast him as a closer. I mean, getting that catcher out of the way, it lets you take – we all love taking those flyers and those long shots late, and it's always a downer, Ray, when you have to draft a catcher in round 23. It's like, oh, no, I'm feeling the groove of, this outfielder who's going to break through this year. And this allows those, you feel good now with your 2 catchers. And again, you're able to kind of throw your weight around later in the draft to get that long shot pitcher or whatever position.
Yeah, maybe I can get Jeff Manns on the Elite Sports Show to make this about draft pockets, and we could talk about the catcher spot because I think there's a lot to this too. Because number one, you make people in the room nervous, and with the way people are, everyone's going to start drafting catchers if they haven't, right? Because they're going, I'm going to lose the catcher. So then guys start taking players that don't necessarily need to be taken there. And then secondarily, and this goes back to a point we made earlier this week that you just referenced, you later in the draft is the time to take chances. It's the time, in my opinion, to be aggressive. We're safe early. We get aggressive later. because, you took Josh Lowe last year in the 29th round and he goes 2020, right? That's the kind of thing you're looking for. If you're taking a catcher in the 23rd round, like Kyle said, he's going to hit 258 with 11 home runs. I mean, what's a good season? 271 with 13 home runs. I mean, it doesn't do anything. No one at the catcher position, no one. Very, very unlikely anyone at the catcher position is going to go Mike Piazza, Javi Lopez. It's unlikely they're going to go Yainer Diaz. So you're taking a pick to make a pick, which has been the battle that I've always fought myself. Once we get to that point where like 15 of the catchers are off the board, is there a difference between guys 16 and 20? Is there a difference between guys 16 and 23? Like, how long can I push this? Because you have to come to the realization that once you get to a certain level, you're just keeping pace is kind of your hope. You're not really looking at an upside play.
And again, you're able to do this. You're able to talk this way about the catcher position because of this influx of youth. Right, last year, Contreras, Rauschman, Diaz, Ruiz, these guys all kind of made the jump. Moreno, Alvarez, O'Hoppe, and Naylor. All solid, cute catcher 1, 2, whatever, right on that border.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like a lot better about one of those 4 versus the other 3? Is there a guy you have as a favorite? Gabriel Moreno, Francisco Alvarez, Logan O'Hoppe, or Bo Naylor in Cleveland?
I think there is something to be said for what do you need, right? Are you looking for more power or more of an overall game? But I identified this guy last year when he was called up. I talked about him a lot in articles at fantasyguru.com. I think if people were with us last year, they know I'm going to say Gabriel Moreno. I think that Moreno's hit tool it may not be elite, but it's close. It's like on that 2080 scouting scale. It's at least a 60, if not a 65, maybe even a 70. Like, it's a pretty damn good hit tool. And what that basically means, and we've seen this to date, he's played 136 games and he's hit 290. And I think he's a 290 hitter. Like, I think that's legit. I don't think that's, because of his batting average of balls in play or anything crazy. This is who he is. And I think his issue is he needs to lift the ball, which we see guys start to do as they get older. But I think that he is a 290, 13 to 15 home run guy. And to me, a 290, 13 to 15 home run guy is usually more valuable than a 230 hitter with 21 home runs, usually. Mm-hmm. But again, it depends on the context of your team. But I'm going Gabriel Moreno.
11th ADP at the position. and Ray, I'm with you. Not that, Moreno's my favorite, but the guy I got to have. But holy cow, sign me up if I can get him. That's my catcher 1. In terms of youth, guys that could be arriving this year, and this will happen. A lot of guys have come in the last year or 2. And so now there's a little bit of a lull. A lot of the more exciting catchers are like in single A or they're 20 years old. Harry Davis in Seattle, Henry Davis, I think it is. Guys like Ethan Salas, who we brought up. So it's a little thin, Ray. I mean, the Dodgers have a couple of guys, Diego Cartaya and Dalton Rushing. It's like the Dodgers just get richer. Now they have like 4 catchers. They don't know what to do with guys. So they'll trade one of them, and come out good. Milwaukee, Jefferson Cuero, who was a name that wasn't really at the tip of my tongue, but almost everywhere I've looked now, he's like one of the top 2 or 3 catchers. And, you'd be putting him on the fast track. But Milwaukee, they've got William Contreras. So it's kind of where does he fit? So I know people will draft Salas, and that's an exciting story. He's like considered a top 10 dude. He's super young, all that. But other than that, Ray, I think there's plenty of depth at the majors to where I'm not like drafting and stashing like we may have with Rauschman a couple of years ago, or even last year, people were taking O'Hoppe and waiting around on his injury. So our Alvarez was a great case. People drafting him and stashing him. I don't think you have to do that at catcher this year.
I think that's fair. Cartaya is the guy, Diego Cartaya with the Dodgers, is someone that I've talked about and identified. And he's actually on my Dynasty League team. We have like 50 roster spots. He's my catcher, my 3rd catcher. I think that he's intriguing. And there was some expectation that he might even see the majors last year, late in the year. Mm-hmm. Didn't happen. He struggled a little bit with the bat at AA, but he showed power. Just the overall game, he lost some walks. Strikeouts went up a little bit. But he's a young guy. Good all-around catcher, defensively and all that too. But like you said, he's blocked by Will Smith. And that's a lot of times what we see with these guys is they either transition them to another position if they're a little weak defensively because they want their bat in the lineup, or they trade them. Because all organizations are always looking for catchers, right? So I agree with you. I think that a lot of the young talent at the position was seen last year. We talked about them last year. We're talking about them right now. I'm not overly concerned about the guys in the minor leagues at the moment in terms of their effectiveness in 2024 in the fantasy game.
So that'll be the end of the catcher discussion. I mean, not that we will never talk about catchers again between now and the season, we will, but in terms of the week-long focus, that takes us to the end of the road. Next week, we'll head up the baselines 90 feet to your right and talk about first baseman going into next week. So that'll be a lot of fun. Before we get out of here, a couple of tightening up of loose ends. White Sox named Dylan Cease their opening day starter, so I guess they've kind of given up on trading him, or maybe it's just, telling people we don't have to trade him. I don't know what that's about. Jock Peterson, Ray, with Arizona. Should we care? 1 year, about $10 million for Jock Peterson.
Yeah. There's a free agent article over at fantasyguru.com where we have a running tabulation of who's, signed where. It's a free article. Anyone can read it. And I went and updated this morning. My comment was something like, he'll play against right-handed pitching. He'll be fine. And he'll be our bench guy in the mixed league. I mean, it's just, he's a guy you turn to if you have the ability, I think, to change your lineup on a daily basis, but nothing to get excited about. David
Robertson added to the Texas bullpen. The only reason I bring that up is we've seen crazier things than him ending up with 20 saves. It's something stupid like that could happen. And then Jonathan India. I don't know how often people have been following this. We'll certainly talk about it as we get to the infield. But, Ray, the Reds, this is, I guess, the other side of being loaded in your prospect pipeline. Is you don't have enough positions on the field to put all these guys. And all of a sudden, the guy who won the Rookie of the Year 2 years ago, Jonathan India, is kind of without a job. The Reds said he'll have to bounce around. He's not an everyday player. We've got rookies we're going to turn to at third, at short, at second. We got Candelario at first. I mean, Jonathan India, and I guess I don't know if they'd like to trade him, Ray. I tell you this, a guy like India, I'd probably rather keep him. His value isn't very high. He's been injured, beat up. People think he's a bench guy, but I think he'll be important for the Reds because the likelihood that all these guys hit, Ray, and all these guys perform and there's no injury, I think India is kind of important to Cincinnati. And I know that the idea is, they got to trade him. Where are you going to play him? As I say, this thing will work out. I think India will be an important piece, at least a guy they're going to have to turn to for probably at least 110 starts this year, I bet, when it's all said and done.
I used to make comments about this all the time, and you used to say, Ray, slow down here. I would say, what the hell are they doing? Like, they're getting all these guys, and you're like, Ray, it always works out, right? Yeah. Someone gets hurt, something happens. Yeah. For me, when they signed Heimer Candelario, I'm like, what are they doing? Mm-hmm. Like, what? Because that someone now can't play. And is Candelario a good Major League Baseball player? Sure. Is he a difference maker? No. Is he appreciably better offensively than India? No. So India is someone that if you read about the team, like, he's a leader. Yeah. Like, everyone gravitates to him, and he's a leader. He's a little bit older, but he's still young, than all the young. He's like a leader. And to think that we're going to make this guy our, bench guy, we're going to turn this guy into John Birdie is just a weird thing. So you have to we lowered him a couple spots in the rankings yesterday with this news at fantasyguru.com because you got to be honest about this. But, you look at this team. I mean, I'm looking at Fangraphs right now, their projections for the team. And, Christian Encarnacion-Strand, who I think most people think can hit 30 home runs in the big leagues, and Jake Fraley, who's a 2015 guy, and he doesn't even play against lefties, they're going to be on the bench when the season starts. Like, that's how deep the Reds are. They certainly have more than enough on offense, which still makes me wonder if they make a move to add some pitching depth. I don't know.
Well, and Ray, maybe it's unfair, but is.
Oh, Kyle froze up. He had something significant to say about the Reds. It was probably going to be profound. That was the word I was looking for. But yeah, maybe we'll get him back here. But if we don't, the Reds do have pieces to make moves. They have the opportunity to bolster a pitching staff right now that's got some youngsters on the hill: Green, Ashcraft, Abbott. They signed Frankie Montas. Kyle, looks like we've got you back. Yeah. What was the devastatingly important comment?
It was so devastating. The internet said, no, you guys need to shut up. No, I was just going to say, I look at Will Benson. It's like I'm not convinced he's here every day. And things are going to move around. You got Steer who can play in the infield and the outfield. Mm-hmm. India, he's not a butcher, but he's not much defensively. But I think Ray could get away with him in the outfield occasionally. You got the DH. I would just say Cincinnati, because no one's going to blow him away with an offer for Jonathan India, because people are looking at that and saying, you've got to trade Jonathan India. And he's not coming off a great year. I just think you hold on to that guy. You don't trade him. Things will happen. So just wanted to update again. India's gone from somebody like literally after that rookie year, Ray. I mean, he was like a top 7 or 8 second baseman in fantasy drafts.
Yeah. He was great.
Going really early, and it hasn't been a disaster, but it hasn't kept ascending for him. Anyway, we'll listen to the internet. Sounds like it's ready to quit on me for the week, Ray. So let's get out of here. Everybody enjoy Sunday. It's going to be a lot of fun. Write-ups throughout the weekend, leading you up DFS and otherwise. Ray will have more baseball columns dropping. Check out that guide, folks. It's great reading. You're going to need something. Remember, after football on Sunday, we have no football for 2 weeks. So Ray's going to keep you entertained. It's his job for 2 weeks to talk baseball and to get you fired up for the season. So take advantage of that. Again, 20% off with FSD20 on that code. Ray, we'll talk Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern, okay?
Looking forward to it, Kyle.
Again, everybody have a great weekend. We will see you then at Fantasy Sports Daily, powered by fantasyguru.com.